Everyone.
Great.
Good morning, good evening. I am Arun Trivedi, and we have a very special guest today on our show. His name is Eric Lin, the head of applied AI at Dynamo AI. Eric leads a team focused on enabling enterprise companies to deploy compliant generative AI with an emphasis on privacy testing, safety red teaming, and implementing explainable guardrails for AI systems. Eric's academic background includes a bachelor's and a master's degree in computer science from Harvard University with a specialization in responsible and private machine learning. His foundation has shaped his career trajectory, which demonstrates a strong focus on AI, machine learning, and product management, particularly in the realm of responsible and privacy preserving AI technologies. Eric has previously worked at companies such as Microsoft and HeadsUp before joining Dynamo AI. With his blend of academic research and industry experience, Eric is dedicated to accelerating the adoption of responsible AI at scale. His work at Dynamo AI involves democratizing cutting edge research techniques in AI safety and privacy, reflecting his commitment to advancing trustworthy and compliant AI solutions for enterprise applications. So, Eric, a very, very warm welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Arun. I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
Excellent. So, Eric, let's dive in. So, tell our viewers about what does Dynamo AI do and what is the vision, and also importantly, tell us about your role as the head of applied AI.
Yes, for sure. So Dynamo AI is tackling the last and most recent technological kind of barrier to generative AI. And we believe, the past few years, you saw the rise of GPT-3 and then now going to OpenAI's O3 and other models. That was very technological, getting the right architecture. And then OpenAI and Gemini and others solved the scale problem. We believe Dynamo is working on the third problem, which is now how do we actually deploy into the real world? How does a human AI interaction work? How do you reduce hallucinations? How do you make sure the ethics and morals are aligned? So we have a team of researchers being born out of the MIT and Harvard Research Lab, working on this exact problem. We took all this amazing kind of research knowledge and created this huge generative AI revolution. How do we actually take the same brain power and apply it to safety and privacy? So my role as head of applied AI at Dynamo is I get to have this opportunity to work with our team of ML PhDs and researchers working on tackling these exact problems with a very specific real world emphasis. And so we see, for example, there's other great companies like Anthropic working on this same exact kind of safety and privacy issue, but they usually tackle it at a high level, at a societal level. We help, actual businesses like banks and different kind of enterprise companies tackle it in their day-to-day. So we're very kind of practical in our approach.
Well, that's wonderful. Eric, so give us an example, or if you can tell us, for example, how does a bank or any other enterprise customer that you're working with, what kind of problem statements are they trying to solve with the help of your technology and your research?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so one of our lighthouse customers is Experian. And so Dynamo's had this opportunity to work with Experian for actually over a year now. And as they kind of look at, let's say, in the credit space where they want to have a chatbot or have some kind of AI-driven interaction with consumers or for their internal purposes, they really have a few key metrics that they want to rely on when looking at generative AI development. The first one is really trust, right? Is they know there's this amazing kind of value add that AI can bring. For example, it can bring efficiency gains or can automate a bunch of routine tasks. But if there's no trust, even if there's a 20% doubt in the accuracy of things or in the privacy of things, first of all, their customer base is going to leave. Let's say Experian is a credit score agency, right? The whole kind of business is based on, is their credit scoring accurate? Can they basically keep the private information private? Can they not leak it to others? And so if the trust is gone, then their whole business collapses. And so that is what we kind of extend to generative AI is, yes, we can automate and gain a lot of efficiency, but if we're sacrificing the key value adds that drive the business, we can't deploy AI until we get that. And so the specific things we do with Experian and other banks is we have this kind of rigorous approach to evaluating AI first, understanding where AI can actually be developed. Let's say within certain use cases, right? Maybe AI shouldn't be the one giving out credit scores for now. but maybe it can automate other different processes. Let's say different routine tasks with database management, different things, internal or question answers with kind of a customer chatbot on their website. And so given each of these use cases, we step through this kind of rigorous analysis, and then we build in the safeguards that are needed to patch the gaps which we see.
Okay, so let's drill down on one of those use cases, Eric. So, for example, let's say I'm a customer coming in on the website and interacting via a chatbot. So, if I ask a question about, it could be what's my credit score? I want to apply for a loan or anything of that nature, credit related. What kind of technology capabilities is Dynamo AI providing behind the scenes? If you can just break that up for our viewers.
Yeah, we provide a wide gambit, but I'll focus on two main things. And the first one is the safety aspect, and the second one is hallucination. So first, the safety aspect, we want to make sure actually the chatbot or whatever AI system is operating within what we call guardrails. And what we might mean by that is, giving your example, if the chatbot is just answering questions about, let's say, how to sign up for experience services, how to sign up for different, let's say, kind of credit score analyses of theirs, or connect them to a real human, the chatbot shouldn't go and kind of off the rails and say like, hey, by the way, here's the best way to increase your credit score. Here's how to get the best credit cards. That's actually what we see when we let GPT-4o or Gemini or these different chatbots. If you let them run and they try to be very helpful, that actually helpfulness is very dangerous sometimes, because they think they're giving you good advice, but from a bank perspectives, if they're telling a customer, hey, like you should get this kind of credit card and you should do this with your loan payment, that becomes very liable to them, and there's kind of legal repercussions, there's financial repercussions. So when we talk about safety, we're extending this kind of concept. You might see, in AI safety, there's a lot of research going on around toxicity, around obviously sexual violence, or things like that. And those are very important topics. But then in the enterprise domain, there's a whole other list of actual very dangerous topics as well. As if you have now a chatbot telling millions of customers, you should get this kind of credit score or try to do this with your kind of investments, that actually poses a huge financial risk, not just for the company, but also for the individuals. And so that's why we're trying to kind of circumvent those kinds of natures and then put guardrails around that. And then the second part is hallucinations. And so hallucinations, of course, there's the regular fact-checking things. You shouldn't say, let's say, if you're citing some source around, let's say, the credit or let's say the mortgage rate, right? Those kind of facts and figures should be correct. But there's the other kind of hallucination, which is what we see around enterprises today is, for example, last year, there's this Air Canada example where their chatbot was interacting with the customer, and they cited basically an outdated or a different kind of policy for refunds. And they told the customer, hey, you can get a refund for this flight that you booked, but you're not taking. But in fact, there really wasn't a policy like that. They confused, the chatbot confused, what was going on. And I think the chatbot behind the scenes was kind of GPT-4. And that kind of hallucination, again, is not just, obviously there's financial repercussions for the company. There's still also actual safety and ethics point of view, where going back to the trust point, there's this kind of trust that the consumer has when interacting with a chatbot, because that's actually a personal relationship, right, with, let's say, in this case, Air Canada and that customer. Now that customer understands, and everyone understands, that actually when we talk to a chatbot on Air Canada's website, maybe we should take everything with a grain of salt. And maybe everything, we have to fact check everything. And now there's this kind of distrust kind of always lurking. And so that kind of hallucination, again, it's not just, these facts and figures are harmful, but actually in the long term, it actually harms the relationship. And so that's something we work on as well, is look at how do we kind of do these hallucination reduction in a customized way, right? If there's specific things around policies that are changing, or if there's very specific analyses we want to do with hallucinations, we allow that and enable some of that research for customers.
That's great. So, Eric, this is a beautiful example. You are building trust and safety, right? Ensuring there's no hallucination, so that way you're building more trust, right? because you're spot on. I mean, trust is the foundation and cornerstone of any business that we have, especially in situations like this. I really need that loan, and if I don't get it, something could happen behind the scenes. So those are very important things. So walk our viewers about some of the technological aspects behind the scene that are happening in any of these use cases.
Yeah, yeah. So of course, my primary role is really in research. So I'd love to talk about that. One of the biggest things I've seen, most exciting things the last 6 months really, is on the research front. As I talked about in the beginning, we had this kind of 2020, 2021. We were figuring out what we were doing as kind of a whole large language model community, and we were scaling that 2022 to 2024. Now we see a lot of the techniques that were being developed to create something as magical as GPT-4o actually start to trickle down into these offshoot kind of domains. And one of them is safety and ethics. And so I think a lot of times people hit, safety and ethics sometimes gets a bad rap, or, is kind of pitted against, let's say, the regular development of AI. So it's either you get safety or you get high quality. But what we work on in the research realm is that we actually don't see this trade-off as clear as others. We see actually sometimes, this actually teaching the safety and ethics to a model helps increases quality and actually develops the reasoning better. And I'll give you an example on the research front. So one problem with these models is that they're trained with this huge corpus of pre-training data. Nowadays, it's almost like 20, 30 trillion tokens of data. And of course, in that pre-training data, there's going to be toxic content and there's going to be unsafe content that might not be filtered through. And in the past, there were some kind of initial research explorations. So let's say, one way to get rid of all this kind of bias issue or safety issue is just let's scrape all of that from the pre-trained data, right? So let's just never tell, if we never tell GPT-4o how to curse, right? Like it can't curse is kind of the thinking behind that. But the more recent trend I see is actually a more nuanced trend. It's saying that actually we should give this kind of GPT-4o understanding of cursing, but actually we have to teach it that cursing is bad, right? It's similar to how we develop children. If you develop a child, it's of course it's naive and innocent when it first comes to the world. But if you never teach it drinking, alcohol, drugs, like it might live a very constrained life. But actually, when it encounters these things in the wild, that actually might not be the best development for that child. You have to teach it, some things are bad, some things are morally wrong. And so the same thing happens on the research front, is we're taking basically these techniques that developed, GPT-4o and o1 to be amazing, let's say, mathematical reasoners, and applying that to the ethics reasoning, right? So the same training techniques that we taught GPT-4o to solve these complex math problems. Now let's transform that training data set and apply the same techniques to ethics, right? And now the tricky thing here is that instead of math, right, in ethics, there's oftentimes a very diverse set of actual solutions, right? There's no like one ground truth, and that's kind of the complexity around it. But actually, I think that's why, in my opinion, the research around this is actually much more interesting. It's because no longer are you just teaching a model to output the same answer over and over again, but you're actually teaching it how to reason. And so the latest developments around, for example, self-reflection, around the actual there's these kind of reinforcement training loops around the ethics around it. That's been helping a lot in the last 6 months.
Wonderful. So, Eric, one of the things that, and just for the clarity of many of the audience, right, who are not intimately familiar with these terms. So let's say, I as an organization, enterprise customer, decide to use either ChatGPT or Gemini for my enterprise solutions, right? It could be around chat, it could be around any of the other automation behind the scene. And on top of that, I layered that with Dynamo AI solution. So does that mean that I have a complete set of guardrails where my customers or employees or external stakeholders can come in and interact in a safe and secure environment, knowing that their data, the information is taken care of and there is no hallucination? Is that the way I should be thinking about your solution?
Yeah, exactly. So we're a layer on top of these models, and that's something where I was talking about, pitting safety and quality trade-off. We don't think that exists because actually, we want OpenAI and Anthropic and Google to succeed and create the best quality model ever. And then we will layer on top with a safety layer and control, hey, like, let's use all your brain power from OpenAI to achieve this amazing efficiency reduction or efficiency gain in this kind of process. And then we'll make sure it doesn't go off the rails. So it's compatible with kind of any kind of model.
Okay, wonderful. Oh, that's brilliant, brilliant. So, okay, so Eric, so the couple of things that I had in mind. So you have conducted extensive research on privacy preserving, trustworthy, and on-device ML optimizations, right? So, what are these concepts?
Yeah. So, kind of at a high level, one thing around AI is, as I mentioned before, it has the need for a lot of data, right? Training data at a huge scale. Right now, the latest chatbots are really trained on basically the entire internet that is kind of legible, at least to the human reader. And so that kind of training data inherently has a lot of privacy information, right? So there's a lot of sensitive information that people might think, people posting on Reddit or different social media platforms, they often leak kind of sensitive information that could reveal their identity. And there's kind of two takes around this privacy preserving aspect. One is the privacy preserving is trying to prevent any kind of private information going into the model. And then the other camp is trying to get the model to never output any private information outwards. And so we work on both, and we can kind of touch upon both if interesting. The other aspect,
yes, please.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the privacy preserving aspect is actually very interesting in the sense that there's parallels to safety as well, because again, with the same problem, you can try to give the model basically and make sure it never gets any sensitive information in the first place. But once we kind of strip away all the sensitive information, let's say you have some training data that says, Eric lives in New York City, right? He works at Dynamo. He goes to this, daily coffee next to his apartment at this cafe, and then he's doing all this stuff, and you use that as training data. If you strip away all that stuff, so a lot of times companies would, strip it away with placeholders. Say, Eric, instead of saying works at Dynamo, would say Eric works at company, and he researches on blank, right? It turns out once you strip away all this data, that actually has a huge harmful effect on the model training, because yes, it can still understand, okay, the general gist of what Eric is doing, but it turns out all the data points now, if you do this for Eric and do this for, Vike or any other kind of training data point, they all start sounding the same, and it basically defeats the purpose of training. And because there's actually a lot of important information, for example, the model learns, in New York City, there's these kind of trends, and in a different region, there's this kind of trend, and it gathers a lot of this latent information and uses that later. So when we talk about privacy preserving training, we actually don't want to have that kind of extreme approach. And instead, we want to have the same mathematical guarantees of, let's say, the model never learning your actual sensitive information, but not having to strip away so much information so that a model doesn't learn, right? So that's actually a very interesting mathematical kind of mini-max kind of constraint optimization problem. And Dynamo actually started out doing this in the form of differential privacy, right? So adding basically small amounts of different perturbations and noise to the training process, so that when the model is learning the information, it also basically kind of forgets the actual details. So you might think about this, in a class you were taking, let's say 10 years ago, around a class around intro to machine learning. You might understand and recall the gist of the learnings. You can still recall, how machine learning works at a fundamental level, but you might not understand all the details, like every single example use case that you were coding up, or the names of the variables, right? And so that's kind of the same kind of technology and research that we're applying to here with differential privacy. Is we apply some level of perturbation so that the model gets confused around the actual details, but understands the fundamental knowledge. And so I think that's kind of a powerful view of, understanding there's a lot of these concerns, but it's not kind of a trade-off. It's not either, oh, we can only have privacy, or we can have good model performance. But we can actually have both if we try hard enough to solve that problem.
Yeah. So Eric, what this means is that on the data training part, right? So there are companies that are actually working on training these kinds of or creating these kinds of data models and LLMs and so on and so forth. So you are trying to work with them, making sure that the data, even though it's stripped, but still has the ability to train the models in the right way, so the outcome is still the same. Now, what if the model has already been trained in those stripped off data? Can Dynamo AI do something about that, those kinds of models?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, we're primarily talking about the kind of input case for privacy, but the output case is also very interesting. Where I was actually just watching a video about a popular chess streamer called Gotham. He has millions of followers on YouTube, and basically he was kind of interacting with Google Gemini, playing chess with that bot, and like in the middle of his chess game, this like 40 move chess game, move 20 or something, he was just playing chess and doing his normal routine. And then Google Gemini output the move that I wanted to play. And it said, by the way, I know you live in this city at this location. Would you like to blank? And basically kind of just unprompted gave out some information. Now, of course, it was a private chat, right, with this chess streamer. But it's just interesting that this model was holding on to some personal information about him and then suggested in a completely random conversation about chess for him to buy some coffee somewhere, right? And so I think that's the concern we have with these models, is even in these unexpected scenarios where we don't think private information like an address has anything to do with chess, for example, it still might output these random kind of thoughts it has. And so that's where we, again, add on that layer with Dynamo AI, is like understanding, okay, in this kind of use case, specifically playing a chess game, like there should never be, first of all, any input with private information, but also if there's any extraneous output, like this kind of address issue or private information, let's block that, right? And let's wipe that from its memory. And so there's two things. One is at the actual inference time. So when we look at the chatbot interacting with the user, we can look at the kind of output and scan it and redact all the PII. And so we have specialized models to do that. And this is where the on-device things comes into play, because it's very important there to be like very minimal latency, and for that thing to be on device, because we don't want this kind of sensitive information going across different networks and being kind of at risk of privacy kind of leakage. And then the second part is, after the fact, after we do this redaction, we actually want to teach the model how to forget this information, right? So, maybe a week later, there should be this kind of reflection process and updating the model saying, hey, like, a couple of chats ago, you were mentioning this kind of address. We actually want you to forget that feature. And we see this also with kind of the latest OpenAI Anthropic models. It now understands and remembers our conversations with them. And now there's a lot more effort into that research around, hey, actually, I don't want you to remember that I have a sister that does this, because I think that's unneeded, right, in our memory.
Wow, that's that's very impressive. So talk to viewers about some of the pressing challenges that you see in the AI governance side, right? As you're working with these enterprises, as you rightly said, with a lot of models just on the data side, on the output side. So how are you treating AI governance overall, an overall aspect?
Yeah. I think one of the best kind of things about working at Dynamo is we have this obviously very research-oriented background, but we also have this connection with a lot of AI governance boards across the world. So, for example, our kind of head of AI policy, Dan, he's been interacting with Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., as well as in the UK with the State Institute and Switzerland, and basically in a bunch of different countries, working directly with their legislators. And we get to basically have these monthly meetings with these congressmen on Capitol Hill, for example. And the biggest insight we've gotten from there is, of course, people think, and the general consensus is that, legislation is always lagging behind technology. And almost by definition, this has to be true, right? You actually don't want legislation to be ahead of technology. There's something wrong if that happens. But, the problem is right now is it's lagging behind too much. And specifically, I think in the AI governance aspect, it's trying to find very clear-cut cases of model disobedience. For example, when we talk about privacy issues or ethical issues on in Washington D.C., they want to point at basically this kind of glaring red flag error, right, and that clearly delineates something wrong. And so, for example, they want to say in your training data set, can you expose someone, let's say OpenAI or some model provider, and explicitly saying they were training on, let's say, racist toxic comments, or explicitly training on discrimination topics. Now, the problem with that is this is kind of an outdated point of view because as we talked about before, maybe AI models 10 years ago were kind of trained on this simple, here's the input, here's the output you want to generate. Now it's a lot more about, again, just this latent knowledge of giving it all the internet. And so there's no kind of red glaring flag that OpenAI, most people, and I hope they're not maliciously trying to inject basically these ethics issues, right? So it's really hard now under these kind of like 10-year ago legislation kind of frameworks to point at something wrong. On the other hand, you see this empirical evidence that something is wrong because, for example, unfortunately, in October of last year, you have a teenager who committed suicide talking to a character AI chatbot, or you have these very saddening news that crop up basically every month or so around misuse of AI or kind of unethical safety aspects or privacy issues. And the current legislation basically does not address those gaps, right? So the thing that we work on with the legislators is how do we create a better framework, right? So if we don't have this clear delineation of someone manually inputting something bad into the model, how do we address, whether or not this model is at risk for basically convincing, let's say, someone to do an unwanted act, right? So that's where we have these evaluation guardrails, where we look at this kind of what we call a Dynamo eval suite, is look at, let's say, OpenAI. It might not have, let's say, a great risk of societal kind of doomsday scenarios right now. Like maybe it's not to the level of, let's say, all those kind of AI sci-fi movies, but it does have some risk again at, let's say, convincing someone to create a credit card debt or take on some loan. And maybe it's being too enthusiastic to tell the person, hey, like you should do this and that, and basically ruin that someone's life financially. And so how do we evaluate that? There's no kind of legislation around this, but there is, at some point, there should be some legal repercussions if, this AI is doing this at a scale of millions of people a day. Right? So that's what we work with the legislators on. It's like, okay, let's look at this specific risk. Let's go through and simulate 1,000 different chats that normal people would have, and basically use a separate AI model to judge whether or not this risk is over a certain threshold. And that is, there requires a lot of human review around it, but basically I'm hopeful around this kind of new direction of AI governance.
Oh, wow. And these human reviews that you mentioned, right? So are these actual people sitting down and looking at all those models that are being generated by this evaluation engine, or how is that? Right?
Yes. So it starts with that. It starts with the human review, and then we automate it and scale it up with AI. And I think that's kind of the story we want to tell is, we want everything to be based in human values and human review, because I personally don't want to trust an AI to come up with a governance framework to judge AI, right? So once we work with legislators, let's say these Congress people in Washington, D.C., on this is the set of 8 different things we want to test AI on. And here's an example use case for each. Then we can utilize AI and actually all its amazing potential, right? To now, given these 8 examples, generate 1,000 examples for each of them. So now we have 8,000 examples, and we test it, right, with the automated process, either using AI or just traditional programming, and then we review it, right? So we have some AI again that filters down this 8,000 test examples into the most glaring ones. Maybe there's 100 glaring issues where the chatbot was going off the rails and really encouraging things, or there's discrimination issues or privacy issues. And then we again review it with a human. And we kind of do this loop where we base everything on the human. The judgment is kind of seeded by the human framework. and a human has the last call on all these things. But the AI is there to basically automate and scale it up, where instead of trying to recruit, let's say, 10,000 people, humans, to do this work, now we can do all of this in a day, right? With just automating a lot of it to the kind of help of the AI pipeline.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. Eric, so, you going back, and talking about your personal experiences too, right? You were at Microsoft and now you're here at Dynamo AI. How has the experiences in your previous companies, especially in Microsoft and others, helped you in your current role? Your role
Yeah,
is
I
very
love my
interesting.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love my time at Microsoft because I was there actually at the initial boom of AI. And I was very happy to work there in terms of I was actually a product manager working in Boston, um, working with the researchers on trying to integrate their research into the product. And so my specific role was, for example, I was working on the Office suite where they have Microsoft has a version of Notion called Loop, as well as obviously they have their email service, their kind of PowerPoint, Word, Excel, etc. And so I was in that kind of department trying to see how do we integrate at that point in time GPT-3, GPT-3.5. This is back in 2021, 2022. How to integrate that into the product, right? And so what I learned from there is there's kind of this huge gap, right, between what the researchers are doing and what the actual end users are seeing, right? So at Microsoft, I was seeing this amazing research. They do a lot of the initial groundbreaking research around privacy, around differential privacy, or around ethics and safety, in the same building as the floor working on, like, let's just put out the chatbot, let's just integrate it into Office. Let's not really think about repercussions. And so that huge difference, just that, let's say a 2-story difference in the office, was really interesting because I had the kind of a half foot in both doors, right? Because I was fundamentally a researcher in college, was studying around AI safety and ethics, and I was working as a product manager, integrating those kind of research into the products. And there's always this tension where enterprises want to basically toe this line where they want to ship something as fast as possible. Right, we see this problem with like Google as well. Is if you wait too long, someone else is going to do it. Right, Google waited for years and years, didn't output a chatbot, and OpenAI did it. But there's also kind of this problem with all the safety, ethics, responsibilities. And so my takeaway around that is that you can't really do this whole development process by adding safety at the end. And so one of the problem is people look at, let's say, GPT-4o, and they say, let's build a great new product around that. Let's build a new startup around GPT-4o, around education. And then they work on it for 6 months, and they build all this amazing UI, they build all the amazing product. It works at scale. And then they're saying, wait, what if, the chatbot for this education harms kids by telling them bad things, right? If you, at the very last moment, only start thinking about safety, that's where everything goes wrong. Because now you're trying to patch all of it together. And you don't want to go back and redesign your architecture. You don't want to redesign your whole product. And so now you're just saying like, hey, let's do some spot checking. Let's do this kind of like duct taping around it. And that's what happens a lot when, let's say enterprises first think about adopting AI. And that's where we see this Air Canada mistake, right? Or we see these kind of character AI mistakes. Is because you can catch, some edge cases, but the problem is if you don't design from the ground up with safety in mind, there's too many edge cases, because generative AI by nature is so different and magical because it has the ability to say anything, right? Because it can be so creative. And that really harms, the safety aspect, because you can't try to build an if statement for every single case. And so and so these kind of companies are trying to develop AI and they just slap on the safety at the end, basically struggle a lot with that.
Yeah. No, you're right, Eric. I mean, safety has to be first, right? Like we keep saying, safety first, right? It has to be truly foundational for all these products. So, Eric, let's talk about the future a bit. So, you are seeing a lot of these trends, right, that are happening here and now in AI governance. Where do you see all of these trends shaping up in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, taking a more future view?
Yeah, one thing that I was at NeurIPS, the premier AI conference in December. It happens every year. This time it was in Vancouver. And I was talking to basically a bunch of safety researchers, as well as professors. For example, Dr. Yashua Benjo was there. He's one of the grandfathers of AI. Max Tegmark was there for MIT. These people were talking about basically this larger trend is in a positive direction, right? If we take a step back, there's lots of issues, and you might see a lot of contentious debates on Twitter or even on LinkedIn or these different platforms where there seems to be two camps. But actually, if you take a step back, we made an insane amount of progress, and I'm very bullish on basically the trend that AI is taking. For decades it was at a it was stagnant, and now we have insane development. And now it's much more of a human problem rather than technological problem, right? And I think we need to shift basically in the next 10 years to understanding that problem. Where I made a post recently about this. For example, the latest models from OpenAI or even competitors like Gemini, they're good enough at most things that people want them to do, right? Now, they might not be the best mathematical researchers. And of course, we might not be at AGI level. And there's a camp that wants to pursue that, and that's great. But the camp that just wants to use AI to improve their lives, there's already almost infinite possibilities for them to do that. Now the only problem is what we were talking about. How do you do this consistently in a trustworthy manner without leaking privacy and safety issues? And so those four things aren't kind of the main focus that we see from the AI research community, right? And so one thing that needs to happen is we need to adapt more, right? More of the research needs to go from let's solve this difficult math problem to let's solve this equally difficult problem around ethics, with equally hard math. And then the other part is we need the legislations, the governance to catch up. And one thing that I was talking about at the NeurIPS conference that's very interesting is if you view the same kind of technological pipeline as AI and compare it to, let's say, healthcare, there's some glaring issues, right? So, for example, in healthcare, there's this kind of, as we learn basically through, I guess, hundreds of years of medicine development, is that you really need to go through a very strict process, as we talked about safety at the first step all the way to the end, about how the medicine is going to affect the human body. There in healthcare, you don't really say design the best medicine to defeat this type of cancer or defeat, let's say, COVID, because there's lots of medicines that can actually do that. Let's say if you just dump some toxic chemical that basically kills all cells, then it'll have 100% effectiveness, right, at defeating cancer or defeating COVID, but it's also going to kill the rest of the body, right? So of course, in medicine, we understand actually safety needs to be the first point. We need to understand how does a medicine interact with the human body? How does it interact with human society? Let's say, does it build up tolerance, or does it actually only affect the one individual, or does it affect people around them, etc.? But we don't do that with AI, right? There's this kind of singular kind of trend where we say with AI we just want the smartest model, and we don't look at, let's say, the trend against does it actually affect the human aspect? Does it affect society as a whole? And so I think as we mature from this AI governance standpoint, hopefully we get to a better place where we take some learnings from the healthcare community or from different kinds of domains and implement some of that. And one of the telling things is we see, for example, in the healthcare community, the people doing lab tests on human trials, for example, at Moderna, right, or at Pfizer, they're seen as basically one of the best teams in those companies, right? Because those companies, if they're able to get to market 2 times faster than their competitor, it's because they can do their clinical trials in 2 times more efficiency, and they can show that's safe in a more convincing manner, right? But almost the opposite happens in the AI race right now, where you see basically, let's say, OpenAI or even Google or Meta, there's often this camp where they think the safety people are holding them back, right? So on one side, you have AI where they think the safety people are kind of hindering the progress. And on the healthcare side, they think the safety people are actually the key to success, to driving market. So once we unlock that and flip that, I think that's going to be a great alignment for both the quality and the safety.
That's a wonderful one, because we not only need the smartest models, but we need the smartest and the safest models, right? So I guess that's
Exactly. Yes.
the yeah. So how do you, Eric? How do you? So there is a need for innovation, right? Where all these models have to evolve at the fastest pace, create the fastest models, the most rapidly responding in nanoseconds or even less, right? Those, and then there is a need for AI regulation that you spoke about earlier. So how would you balance these two, which seem to be conflicting with each other?
Yeah, I think one of the best things to do when we look at these conflicting kind of needs is to tailor it down and make it a much more tractable problem by um, like analyzing one specific use case. And so actually internally, I do this a lot with our team where we have the same problem. And I think every single company you can see in this AI race is having the same problem where if you try to achieve, as you said, AGI plus safety, and that's the goal, it quickly becomes basically a theoretical battle discussion that goes nowhere because no one really understands how to do it. And there's so many different edge cases that you can talk on for like 8 hours, right? Every single day, every workday would just be listing all these different edge cases. Now, if you tailor it down and say, okay, let's stop thinking about the kind of AGI aspect for now. And also let's not tackle safety at every single level and for all of society and also for individuals. And let's just pick one example, right? To go back to our first example with credit scoring with a chatbot, right? In that constrained space, we don't have to worry about biological risk, let's say sexual violence, etc., right? Because we can constrain all of that programmatically. We don't allow that to ever happen, right? We don't even need AI to constrain that. We just, we build the product to not have that be possible. And then it's only about, let's say, financial advice and hallucinations within this credit score use case. And it turns out that we know how to solve. And actually, we've showed, for example, with our most recent papers, like if you have a very specific need and to guardrail that, we can create amazing guardrail models with 98%, 99% accuracy. It only becomes a problem when you try to do too much, right? So when we constrain now to let's only use AI for this specific problem, we can develop this kind of safety net for it. And so now with that base case, first, I think companies need to adopt this mindset where they do want to constrain AI and they want to basically assert some kind of levels of control around it to maintain that trust. And then you can start slowly expanding it, right? So, if that's the baseline case we have in January 2025, maybe by mid 2025, June or July, we can have, basically loosening the controls a little bit with the same level of safety, right? So over time, I think we'll see great progress in this direction where, we'll still get to what people want, which is, let's say the AI with all its creative potential, with all the safety concerns. It's just going to take a little bit of time without kind of I think the mistake people are making right now is they want to have the quality first and have no constraints, and then they go the other direction, right? So that if we go the other direction where we give free reign to the AI and basically start adding controls, then we're going to keep seeing these kind of issues versus the other way around.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Eric, so there are a lot of AI governance platforms that are available, right? Such as what you are doing as well. So how would these platforms evolve to meet the path that you just outlined?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this is something that we've learned the hard way as well the last 2 years, is the difference in nuances between different companies. And so with AI governance, in the beginning, let's say 2022, we thought, everyone was just concentrating on toxicity, as I mentioned, and everyone had the same definition. Let's say don't output curse words. And so you can imagine a AI governance platform would have a dashboard, very simple, right? Say like, how often does ChatGPT curse? And how often does it, let's say mention things that might be discriminatory? Now, that second one, it turns out, quickly became a problem because people define discrimination differently. And not just, let's say, politically or things, but actually it's different within different use cases, right? So one bank might be targeting high wealth individuals, and discrimination might mean very different to them versus another bank is primarily working with working class individuals, right? So now when you evaluate these governance platforms, it quickly becomes the issue where you can't have the same dashboard given to all banks. And that's one of the issues we see with trying to take these leaderboards that say we have with AI chatbots and apply them to ethics, is that it doesn't actually make sense. For example, you can't have the same leaderboard. Let's say like ChatGPT is the most ethical, safest chatbot. It doesn't make sense to say that because actually you have to understand in what context, right? Under what definition of safety. And so what we've learned basically, and I hope the whole AI governance community, as well as the legislators, learn from this, is that you need to set kind of these customizable guidelines, saying like if your issue around discrimination is, let's say, giving different output responses to one gender versus another, then we can build a specific dashboard for that, and we have a specific test training data set for that. We have a specific evaluation criteria for that. Now, if you define discrimination a different way, here's another criteria. And again, it's going to be kind of, maybe people aren't going to be satisfied because it's not a clear-cut answer. But sometimes it's going to be, let's say Gemini is going to be safer in one scenario, and then ChatGPT is going to be safer in a different scenario. And then it's going to be up to the enterprises or end users to analyze and say, which scenario do I fall in, right? And which one do I care about? And then how do we patch, those scenarios for these chatbots I'm using? So I think that kind of customizability aspect is going to be very important instead of trying to rely on these kind of grandiose, generic safety ethics terms.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of explainable AI, Eric, what advancements do you expect in explainable AI?
Yeah, explainable AI is really interesting because there's a difference between, I guess, interpretability and explainability. And so one thing that I actually talk to a lot with a few more non-technical folks is a lot of times they want explainability or interpretability, but maybe they want the other thing, right? So one thing is around explaining the AI and understanding like why is it outputting that response, right? So it's one term refers to in the research community talks about actually going through and parsing. Let's say ChatGPT outputted some racist comment, right? Let's trace it back to exactly why I made that comment. And so there's a bunch of complex mathematics. There's a bunch of different techniques where we can say this training data point around this kind of data, let's say around gender groups and doctors, created this kind of information inside the model. And that model now, when prompted around the question around doctors was being discriminatory against women or men, right? But there's a lot of complex math around that, and it's really hard to explain to end users that. But oftentimes they actually don't want to know all the inner workings, right? As a kind of end user, you might just want to make sure you're interpreting the AI correctly. And so in the interpretability sense, it would just be, can we interpret the meaning behind the AI and understand, is it aligned with kind of my values, right? So I see basically there's going to be efforts on both fronts, but actually interpretability is going to be much more important because we want basically humans to not just take the AI's word for granted and say, okay, this is going to be the ground truth, and we're going to go with whatever the AI says, but actually interpret what it means and actually make sure there's a misunderstanding and then evaluate for themselves if they want to use that information. And there's no need for the human to understand exactly how and why it came up with that, because oftentimes AI doesn't give a satisfactory answer anyway. And so I think there's basically going to be this separation. And a lot of times people, I think, stop at this kind of simple one-dimensional, I guess, one pass-through use case where they ask a question and they get a response and they evaluate whether that response is good. What we've seen, again, with the latest AI research is that there's immense value, actually exponential value, with if you do this loop, right? So don't stop with the answer, right? If you go reprompt the model and actually understand, have you considered this thing, or what about this? That gives you a lot more information, right? So how do we utilize that kind of insight we've gained in the last 6 months and apply that to interpretability, right? For example, can you reduce hallucinations in this way if you align the human and give it some feedback mechanism to the model? That's what I'm really excited about for the next year.
Wow, that's yeah, I hadn't quite thought about it, but you're right. Interpreting the results versus trying to understand why the result came. I mean, completely two different things. And maybe there's no need for just trying to understand why did the model come up with an answer, but rather than figuring out my own context and then asking prompts based on what I need.
Yeah, exactly. I think oftentimes, obviously, as researchers, we would love to understand AI, and we need to understand AI to keep developing it. But then for end users from a product standpoint, that's where kind of, I guess, my previous experience at Microsoft taught me as well, is you don't have to explain, right, exactly how the car works to a person driving the car, right? You just need to explain it enough so that they can interpret the feedbacks it gets and trust, again, the car is going to operate within a certain way, going to be safe, going to do what it wants, right? You don't have to explain how the engine works, basically, to the driver.
Yeah. No, wonderful, Eric. Eric, so with that, we come on to the last segment of the show, which is the rapid fire round. So let's get started then. So my first question to you in the rapid fire is that what is AI's biggest threat to privacy in one word?
My one word is autonomy. And to further explain it just in a few sentences, we see a lot of word about agents, right? And a huge kind of progress also on having AI agents basically automate a lot of things. But as we automate more things, and this autonomy is taken away from the human and given to the AI, that's what we were talking about. There's going to be a lot of these hidden checks that the AI is going to do by itself. And again, that's going to be great in a lot of cases and going to incur a lot of ethical dilemmas and privacy issues in other cases. And so the autonomy is something we have to think really critically about.
Wonderful. That's a great answer. The second one, what is the most exciting AI breakthrough that you are looking forward to?
Yeah, I kind of referenced this earlier, but it's actually maybe not a specific breakthrough, but taking the breakthrough we had in the last month with OpenAI's O3 model, with these reasoning things, and applying it to human AI interaction, right? So again, we saw all this reasoning. Basically, people keep posting these kind of benchmarks around coding or math, and they say OpenAI is solving math or solving programming. That's great, but actually, in my mind, a much more interesting problem, a much more difficult problem is ethics and safety, right? So to me, actually, as humans, we haven't solved ethics nearly as much as we've solved math, right? We still really don't really agree on a lot of things in ethics. And so can we apply some of those same reasoning mechanisms, those breakthroughs, into this more amorphous domain of safety and ethics? That's what I'm excited about.
Yeah. All right. That's great. The third one, what is your favorite book on AI ethics?
So one of the great books that I read is around Life 3.0. And it's around Max. It's a book written by Max Tegmark. And I would preface it with saying, Max is a PhD and professor. He has a lab at MIT. He's been one of the most kind of prolific proponents around AI safety and ethics. And this book was written in 2017. And the reason why I write about it, or I recommend it, is it's actually very useful to think about how people thought before any of the AI craze came about, right? For example, transformers were kind of introduced in a research paper by Google in 2017, right? And this book was published in 2017, so it was probably written before that. And so you really see, and he steps through basically all the different things that we've been talking about very clearly. He talks about life 1.0, which is technological, life 2.0, which is societal, life 3.0, which is what happens when AI transcends humans. And again, I don't think you have to agree with everything what he says, and I don't agree with everything what he says, but it's useful to think about his framework for how to address these privacy issues and extend it. Because I think the fact that his book has been so spot on, even though it didn't know about ChatGPT, I think gives it a leg up in terms of this methodology compared to books that have come out let's say in the last 2 years, which obviously have reacted more to the whole ChatGPT craze.
Yeah, I'll tell you that, Eric, that book is in my read list. I haven't read that book, but
Awesome.
yeah, I have that in my. I'm going to read it. Yeah, for sure. But thank you for
Yeah,
recommending that book.
yeah, and I had the kind of the luck to actually meet him in person, and I think Max
Wow.
is a great person as well. So.
Oh wow, oh, lucky you. Actually, lucky me that I have you on the show to talk about. All right. The next one. What is the one skill that every AI professional should develop?
Yeah, so actually, this is actually one of my 2025 New Year's resolutions. Is I actually wrote this actually last week. I want to make sure everyone understands how to use AI properly, and what I mean by that is, for example, from a standpoint of my own safety research, I've obviously been a little hesitant, right, to rely on AI too much, and there's obviously privacy and ethics issues, but I think a lot of people don't understand that this human AI interaction, this interpretability issue, these kind of ethics issues, can't be solved if we're thinking about AI from a theoretical black box point of view, right? And I really do think from a product manager point of view, we really need this kind of day-to-day interaction and understanding how do we do it. And so I would actually encourage people, again, I don't think it's a good idea to just let AI write all your blog posts or write every single LinkedIn thing or read all your papers and summarize it for you. But I would encourage you to try to use AI in a small way, like let's say once a week, and see how can you improve it, right? And again, don't stop at hey, I tried one question, the AI gave me a bad response, the AI is terrible, or the AI gave me a perfect response, oh, it's going to take over the world. Actually try to play around with it and understand basically how you can improve it. And I think that's going to be the key to developing better kind of products and human AI interaction.
Okay, wonderful. And then the last one, how do you see AI governance in 2030? Is it going to be more stricter or is it going to be more relaxed?
I think it's going to be a lot more rigorous in its framework, and it's going to be super strict and specific use cases. As we talked about earlier in this session, for certain things, let's say, if we use AI to do healthcare development or financial risk planning or certain things like that, there should be an immense number of guardrails on it. If you're using AI to, let's say, write a poem for you, or let's say summarize an article, there probably shouldn't be that much legislation and oversight on it. And so I think basically we oftentimes categorize AI in this big bucket of everything needs to has the same regulation. I think over time, hopefully there's going to be this kind of dissemination to these clear kind of different modules that people can use AI in certain ways they can't use it in others.
Yeah, no, wonderful. So Eric, with that brings us to the end of the show. I really want to appreciate your time for our viewers and for the channel. So thank you so much, Eric.
Yes, this was great chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you.